Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's training session, Azure Data Fundamentals, virtual education prep session for Microsoft Learn for Educators. My name is Marisa Vitiello, and I'll be your moderator today. We're broadcasting this training session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. Today's session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. By participating in this session using Microsoft Teams, your name, email address, phone number, and/or title may be viewable by other session participants. If you do not consent to being a part of a recorded session, please disconnect at this time. If you have questions for the presenter or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. We have presenters standing by to answer your questions today, and we'll have time available at the end of for further questions. We have closed captioning available in English, Japanese, German, Spanish, Chinese, and Korean today. To turn on closed captioning, click the CC button located in the lower right corner of your screen. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Our trainer today is Dipanshu Tyagi, Azure Technical Trainer. Over to you.
Hi, thank you, Marisa, and welcome everyone to this Train the Trainer session, which is around Azure Data Fundamental course. I welcome you to this session. And I'm not sure where you all are located. You could be joining in from many different cities and many different states. So just accept my good morning, good afternoon, right, or good evening or good night, wherever you are, depending on. I am based out of Singapore, and time here is 10 p.m. Let's get started. I would be getting started with a very quick introduction about myself. And then thereafter, of course, there would be opportunity for me to get to know you better, but let us first get started with my introduction. So my name is Dipanshu Tyagi, and I'm an Azure technical trainer. And I belong to this team that is called as Microsoft Worldwide Learning Team. Now, this is the team that is responsible to create any learning related content that you see anywhere, and for the learners and as well as people who are working in the enterprises. I have close to 15 years of experience in IT industry, but my main focus has been throughout the years around data and AI and analytics technologies. During my career, I've given many Microsoft certifications, and so far the count or the number of exams that I've taken or I've passed, or I managed to pass, you can say in some of the instances there, is 35, and then that would, I think, continue to grow in coming years. I have worked with various organizations and in various roles as well. I have worked with companies who solely deliver trainings, and they happen to be training partners for Microsoft as well. And that's where I started my career in about 2007. So I was a trainer when I started my career. And then thereafter, I moved on to various roles in various companies such as IBM and Accenture and Avanade. And I actually was doing different kind of roles in each one of these companies. I was a consultant somewhere. I was a database administrator, and sometimes I was doing production support kind of a thing. But my most recent role at Microsoft was of a cloud solution architect, because it's all about Azure. But if you look at this particular course, in addition to Azure, we all are also going to focus on data, right? So how do you manage data in Azure is what we will get to. But other than my job, which I do, which is delivering the trainings, I also have a certain interest in music. So in my spare time, other than when I'm delivering the trainings, I mostly spend time in getting better at playing the instruments that I play. And then at the same time, because this industry, IT industry, is rapidly keep changing, and therefore you need to keep up. You need to keep learning, and that basically becomes like a like a ongoing thing for you. Now, these are some of the certifications or the badges, right, that I have managed to achieve during these past couple of years. But one particularly which I would like to, I would like to spotlight is this Microsoft Certified Fundamentals, and this is actually Microsoft Certified Data Fundamentals badge that somebody who has taken this Azure Fundamental exam would get. But that is a quick introduction about myself. Now, the next would be we would like to know you. And to get started, of course, there are various things that we would like to understand about you as to what is exciting you about learning about this particular course that is Azure Data Fundamental. In case you want to share your experience with cloud technologies in general, feel free to do that. And whether you have any expectations from this course, you can also put them under the chat window and we will get to read that, because when you do that, it would help us to tailor the session in a manner which would be most beneficial to you. So please do that. I would just stop here on the screen for a moment, because what I want is that there are a few things which I want to know about you as well, and we would do it in a little interactive way. So let me just pull out another screen here. And what you see is a Q&A, a digital Q&A, you can call it. And I would like everybody to participate here. What you need to do is that whether you are using your mobile phone or your laptop, maybe just open a browser and type in menti.com. Menti.com. So this thing that you see on the top, right? Just type in www.menti.com and it will ask you to enter a code when you go there, enter 429426. The moment you enter the code, you will see the same question on the screen, and then you have to answer this question that you see. So I would like to find out where all are you joining from for this session. Just tell us which city, which state are you joining us from. So if you could just go to menti.com, enter the code, and type in the answer to this short question. Let me wait for a few seconds to receive some responses here. Barcelona, welcome. Western Somerset, UK. All right. Statesboro, Georgia. Jerusalem. Nice. Angers, France. Paris. All right. Beirut, Lebanon. Let's wait for a few more seconds before we move on. Quilota, Chile. And Turkey. Costa Rica. Welcome. So I see people coming in from many different countries, many different cities, but welcome all of you to the training and thank you for sharing. This is, I think, in a way to get you more engaged in the training, right? And this is also something that you could probably take to the sessions when you deliver them to the learners on your side. Monterrey, Mexico, York, UK. All right. Okay, thanks everyone. Lima. Okay, good. Oh, okay, Taipei, Taiwan as well. All right. I was wondering that there isn't any response from the Asia side. Okay, thanks a lot for that. Now let's move on to the next question. Now, see, as Microsoft delivers this course, this course is delivered in one day. We deliver the entire Azure Data Fundamental course in one day, but I'm not sure how do you deliver this? Whether you deliver this course just in one day, the entire course in one day to the learners on your site or to your students, or do you deliver it over several days? So that is another question that I do not know, and therefore I'm trying to find answer to that. So please help me with that. You will see the question being refreshed on the same screen. So just let us know. How would you be delivering this course? Would it be just in a day, over a few days, in a week, or for over a week? Okay, a couple of more seconds there. In a week, all right. So I think mostly looks like that there's nobody who's delivering this course in a day, which is I think a good thing because you deliver this and then the students would have time to go back and basically relook at what has been taught to them. Okay, thank you for sharing that insight. Yeah, I think I have answered to my question with that. Okay, you can stop responding now, and thank you for your participation in this. In the meantime, feel free to type in any questions that you have, any expectation that you have with regard to the course, and we will, while delivering, try to tailor that so that you get best out of this training. Feel free to type your questions in the Q&A, and we are going to pick them up and answer them as we go along. So while you take your time, maybe we can move forward, but you can also put them while we go along, and we would take that input and deliver it accordingly. Let me move on. Now, here is the agenda for today's session. These are the key bullet points that we are going to focus on. And of course, there would be some more content when we go to the detail of each one of these bulleted points. Where we want to get started is accessibility, because you yourself being in the teaching role where you are interacting with students who are who are joining in from many different places, and they bring in their own skill sets, right? They are able, and some of them are especially abled. So we just want to be making sure that the content that is being delivered or the way the training is delivered is in a way inclusive for every single learner that you have. That would be first thing that we would be looking at. And then from the perspective of the course itself, which is Azure Data Fundamental, what would be your overall approach in delivering this course to your learners is what we will take a look at in the second bulleted points. Now, of course, before you go into delivering the training, there are some technical requirements and some prerequisites that you will need to look at. So we will share those technical requirements so you are better prepared before you face your learners, and as well as what are the prerequisites that your learners will need to have in order to get best out of this course. Next is how does the course flow? There are different types of content that we are covering in there. There are different modules because the course is typically arranged in module 1, 2, 3, 4. Every module has a certain number of lessons, and every lesson has a certain number of slides. Now, there is a natural flow of the course in which it is designed that I think most of the time would stay the same. But what you as a trainer can do is that you are free to rearrange some of the slides one after the other, probably bringing some of the slides which are coming onto the later part of the lesson and bring them to the front, and then move around the slides in such a way that you get to deliver the best content to the learners. Because what happens is that you know what kind of learners do you have, and we often do not have that advantage, because when I deliver a training, people actually join in from many different areas. I would probably not have that insight, but since you have that, you can actually take that input and adjust the flow of the course, or adjust the slides or the content in which sequence would you like to deliver that. We will then move on to module best practices, where we will be sharing with you what are the key topics that you need to cover in each one of these modules. So kind of key takeaways from every module. And no matter how you deliver, because everybody has a different teaching style or different delivery style, we just want to make sure that at the end of the day, we have met the objective of that module by sharing that sufficient knowledge with the learners. So we will take a look at that. Then demo is very, very important, because we can talk for a very long time, but I think the course is best served when you also include some demos in that. Now, what kind of demos can you show? Can you comfortably show? And how do you choose? How would you pick and choose? What demos would you like to include in your delivery? Because course might have many demos, but you need to just choose the right ones to show to the right audience. Then lab strategies. How would you approach the labs? Of course, the labs could be very simple when you're looking at this course, or they could also involve deploying a number of services and then integrating them together to have a working solution, right? So how would you strategize to cover those labs in your trainings? We will take a look at that. At the end of the training, or just before that, we would share some supplemental material as well, or some supplementary material that you can also refer in addition to what we are covering today. Of course, there are plentiful of material available around the services which are being covered in this course. So at any point of time, if you're interested to find out more details about them, you can make use of that supplemental material. And then finally, we will take a look at exam preparation for this. So let's move on. The next important thing is, because we are talking about Azure Data Fundamental and we are talking about labs. Now, in order to do the labs, in order for your learners to follow through the labs, you will need to create services, you will need to deploy resources in Azure. And to do that, because services do not come for free. I mean, they come free in some instances, whereby if you happen to be an educator, as you see here, right, you can actually get a free credit of $200. But that is kind of Microsoft offsetting that cost for you being an educator. So you would be getting 200 worth of credit, which you can then use to deploy Azure services, which you are asked during the labs in your trainings. But that is you. In addition to that, your students, they can also create a free Azure student account, as you see here. And by creating that, they would get $100 credit. Now, the next question that you might have is that whether that credit of $100 or $200 is sufficient for your students or for educators or not. Now, since there are many fundamental courses, as you can see, there is Azure Fundamental, there is AI Fundamental, and there is DB Fundamental course, which we are doing today. There are labs, and you would be creating different services in different modules. But as long as you create the services, you use them while you are doing the labs, and you delete the services, you would not at any point of time be spending more than $20, as you see here, more than $20 on any of the services that you're deploying. So $20 is sufficient in a way if you are a little prudent and a little careful with the services in provisioning and in deleting them when they are not in use. And if you combine all the three courses together, you can actually still complete all the three courses and just have $55 spent on that. So looking at these numbers, you can see that the credit which is given to students and educator is sufficient enough. But for students to get to this, you need to be over 18 years. And in addition to that, when you get access to this free credit, there are a number of Azure free services available. Those would still be available to you for a period of 12 months. But the actual credit that you get, because there are plentiful of other services which are paid services, you would still have $100 to be used for that purpose. The next thing is Azure Lab Services that you see here. Now, Azure Lab Services is actually a very good option because what happens is that you being an educator, your IT team actually might have the setup already in which they have provisioned virtual machines which come ready to do the labs for this particular course. And that helps because everything comes pre-installed and you just need to seek permission to access those virtual machines in order to do the labs. And another good thing about this is that you basically come and do the labs of one particular module. You create a certain database objects, you provision services, etc. You create some data and you shut down the lab and you restart it again. It actually starts fresh. So in case something is broken, something is misconfigured, right? Something has happened, you can just restart the machine and you would come back to the fresh machine in which you can again start doing the labs. And then there are also Azure developer tools for teaching, which are available, but that is available to the institutions which have Microsoft Volume licensing agreement. So if you happen to be an institution which is covered under Microsoft Volume licensing agreement, you would be getting access to those tools for teaching as well. But remember, shut down all Azure services when not in use. Okay. Now let's get to the first point, that is accessibility. It'll be very, very important when you're delivering the courses because we want every learner, every student of yours to be, or you want every learner of yours to be getting best out of the training that you deliver. And we have a different kind of students coming in. And you could have somebody who is, let's say, colorblind, and therefore the content that you're delivering needs to be developed keeping those students in mind, right? You shouldn't be having so much of red or so much of green used because that would be very, very unclear to these people. And therefore, we at Microsoft, when we design the content or the official content that you would be getting from Microsoft for this course has been designed keeping those things in mind. And therefore, there shouldn't be any problem. But at the same time, when you teach these courses, you are also in command. You can add new content to make your training successful because you know the audience. And when you are doing that, it is very important that you keep this accessibility in mind as well, so that you can accommodate students which are which have a special need towards hearing or towards mobility or towards vision and neurodiversity, right? So just keep that in mind. It is very, very important because we want to offer them an inclusive atmosphere for learning, and that becomes very important in that aspect as well. Now comes to overall approach to deliver this course. What does this course cover? Of course, as I said, it is a data course. It is not purely Azure course, I would say, because you could be, or your learners could be someone who does not know a thing about very core basic data concepts. Where we are starting this course is that we will make you aware, we will teach you these basic and fundamentals about data as to what are the various types of data that you have available, how can these data be stored, right? And therefore a lot of abbreviations and the short forms that you would be reading in the very first module of this course. But that becomes technology agnostic because the knowledge that you get, you could actually apply it anywhere or any of the cloud provider, because you first need to understand fundamentals of data. Once you have understood that, the topics such as relational databases, non-relational databases, transactional, and OLAP and OLTP kind of thing, once you are aware of that, then you can go down into the technology part, which is Azure. Because of course, we want to show you as to how would you be implementing relational databases or non-relational databases in Azure. So therefore, once you are well prepared from the data sphere, you can then actually take it forward and get to do the things using services which are available in Azure. And that is how the course is designed. So we will teach you the fundamentals. We will teach you the relational databases. We will teach you the non-relational services in Azure. And then finally also on the data warehousing. Now, who are the expected audiences for this course, or who are the correct audience for this course? You actually need to have some basic understanding of how these concepts such as relational databases and non-relational databases, right? And what does overall analytics does, you got to be familiar with that. And in addition to that, the content that you will be delivering as part of this course, it actually very much aligns with the certification, which is DP 900. And once the learners have completed this course, they would come out very well prepared to also pass that exam, that certification exam, because the content has been designed in such a way. And that is the prerequisite, which is in other words, the familiarity with the relational, non-relational data concepts, as I said. Now, objective domains. And this again links back to the certification as well, right? But if you look at it, there are 4 modules, as I was mentioning earlier. Module number 1 talks about explore core data concepts. Because this course, as I said, is not just an Azure course. This course is actually particularly how would you do data using Azure services. But before you go into Azure, module number 1 considers that you are somebody who would probably not know Azure. But then you need to be prepared. You need to know the fundamental data concepts, whereby we will be talking about different types of data. How can you store these types of data? What are the different types of databases which are deployed in terms of relational and non-relational? Why is there a need to have these different kind of data storage technologies? All that you would get to learn in module number 1, but it will be cloud agnostic. This is just to have you understanding of these different concepts as I've spoken just now, because you need to be very, very clear on that. And although from the certification point of view, this module is considered to be a basic module, you will find that there are very, very important concepts which are covered, which would which would prove to be very, very helpful when your learners are looking at getting certified for that. So it's a basic module, but very, very important module from the course perspective. Once you have learned the core fundamental concepts around data, we then move on to module number 2, which is explore relational data in Azure, where we simply talk about relational data. How can you implement relational databases? How can you deploy relational workloads on Azure? What are the various services available that let you do that? Because there are many different services which would allow you to deploy a relational database. And of course, we will not be touching upon all of them in the course, but it is good to mention that there are a number of services which are available, which can help you deploy a relational database in Azure. And that is what module number 2 focuses on. Now, today, the reality is that not all the data can be arranged in like a tabular form, which has a fixed format. There are different types of data that gets collected. And therefore, we want learners to know how can they store non-relational data, which doesn't have any format, which doesn't have any fixed, kind of a look. It could be audio, video, etc. And then how do you store that? And then how do you process that? So that is what module number 3 is all about. And we cover technologies such as Cosmos DB here, because that is a non-relational database. And it can actually then help you to host very complicated and very responsive applications as well. So that is what module number 3 focuses on. And in addition to Cosmos DB, there are a couple of other services which still let you store non-relational databases such as storage accounts, right? And table storage and file share storage. These are the different services which get discussed in module number 3 so that you get familiar with non-relational data services in Azure. Module number 4, which is in a way an important module because it talks about data warehouse. Data warehouse is a very, very popular concept, but then you have a lot of data stored. So you would want your learners to know that how can you then process the data that you store in a data warehouse. And because as the amount of data grows, you would still they would be curious to know as to how can technology help them to process a huge amount of data in a very short span of time or very, very quickly. So that's where the modern data warehouse concepts comes into the picture. And in this module number 4, we will talk about services such as Azure Synapse Analytics, which offers you a modern data warehouse. And thereby, you would also explain to your learners what is the difference between a classic data warehouse and a modern data warehouse is something we will take a look at as we move along. Now, certification areas. As I said, the content of this course, it actually aligns to a certification that is DP 900. And since there are 4 modules, on this slide here, you basically see every module one after the other. This is module number 1, module number 2, 3, and 4. And then the weightage. And you can actually translate it into the number of the questions that you or your learners would expect to see when they go and take the exam to get certified. Now, module number 1, as I said, it is a basic module, but an important module, has a weightage of 15 to 20. Relational data in Azure has 25 to 30. Non-relational, 25 to 30. And analytics workload on Azure is 25 to 30 as well. Now, you would be having certain number of questions in exam. Now, the higher the weightage, more are the number of questions that you can expect to see from that module. But if you look at it holistically, if you haven't covered one of the module properly, right, that 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 can actually create some problems, I would say, right? So therefore, every module is important and plays its part in this. But that is how the study areas are defined and the weightage that is associated to them. Now, it is also very important, in addition to the overall approach that you're taking, that the expectations are set. In order to better do that, you need to know who are the audiences. Now, you know your learners, you know what do they know, and you know what they do not know. And when you have that clarity, you can actually tailor the content which is provided to you in a way which actually does deliver the course in the best possible manner for them. Because then you can use that insight to basically, add some additional concepts that would be helpful for them, which might be or might not be, part of the core course that we're talking about, right? But that would actually, at the end of the day, help your learners who are attending the course. It is also better to know what are the prerequisites, because you would expect learners to be bringing in those prerequisites in the training or before they come into the class. And hands-on labs. There would be hands-on labs provided as part of the course, so the learners wouldn't just be hearing you talking, but there would be hands-on labs, and it would be advisable that you run the hands-on labs and then you let them follow through with you as you go along. So there would be a number of hands-on labs that you can make use of in order to show exactly how are the services or how is the technology working. Different types of solutions are deployed, but any application or any workload that you deploy these days in cloud, at the core of it, you will still have data, because data is very, very essential and is and is basically the backbone of any solution that you develop or your learners would get to develop. And therefore, it makes sense that you understand how does the data work? What are the data related services which are offered in Azure? And then the goal of for the learners is also to get certified. So you can convey this as well, because once they have gone through the content or they have gone through the training that you deliver, they are in a good position or in a good shape to also get certified at the same time. And while you deliver the training, you need to keep in mind that you're covering at those study areas or those focus areas which are contributing in preparing them to also pass the certification exam at the end of the day. Okay, so before I move forward, I would just like to pause here and take any questions if you have at this moment.
I do not see any questions in the chat, so I think you're good to keep moving on, but let's encourage people to keep putting their questions in the chat in the Q&A area.
Yes, so if you have any questions, please feel free to write to us and we will take the questions as we go along. Thank you. Now let's get to the technical requirements. Before you could smoothly deliver this Azure Data Fundamental course. Now, you being an educator, what are the hardwares and software requirements that you have? Of course, you need a PC or a laptop because you need to have the content ready and you need to be able to present that content to your learners. That needs to connect to internet because the course also requires you to navigate through Azure portal and create a number of services. So that is also required. You need to have a modern operating system. I mean, of course, you can launch Azure portal on a Windows machine or on a Linux machine, right? But you need to have a modern operating system for that. And a modern browser. The key thing to note here is that if you're using any older version of browsers or something very old, for example, if you're still using Internet Explorer, you might actually have some difficulty in launching Azure portal and doing hands-on labs, which are part of the course. So keep in mind that you have not too old operating system, right? We would recommend that you have Windows 10, and at the same time, you shouldn't be having something like a Windows Vista, right? Or Windows XP, because those are considered to be very old operating systems, and you might actually face difficulty if you are on one of those. And the same applies to modern browser as well. You could be using the Edge browser, or we would even recommend that you would be using Edge Chromium browser, right? Which is the most recent Edge browser that Microsoft has. But you also have other options such as Chrome that you can use. Microsoft PowerPoint needs to be there because you will be presenting the content using this software, and the ability to display PowerPoint slides to students, of course. And in addition to that, Azure subscription. And I covered earlier that you would need to have an Azure subscription, which you can get for free being an educator, and your learners can also get it being the students. These are the prerequisites. And then if you look at it from the student perspective, of course, for them, they need to have a PC or laptop and access to internet and an OS, which is modern, as well as a browser. In addition to that, in the classroom, because you are connecting to the Azure portal, and therefore it is important that wherever you are delivering the training, you need to work with your IT team to make sure that they have opened the port 80 and 443 at the network level. Because if these ports are not open, you would have difficulty in connecting to Azure portal. And since you cannot connect to Azure portal, you can't actually showcase how are the services created, how are the services provisioned. I mean, you can't actually show any demo. They can't do hands-on lab, right? So this is something that you have to work very closely with your IT team and make sure that these ports are open. So that is another requirement. Now, How does the course flow? Let's go through that. Of course, you are delivering the session for your learners and you are in command. So you can order the deck here and there, but I would say that the way modules have been created, they actually flow in a logical order, because at any point of time, it wouldn't make sense that you cover non-relational databases before relational, right? Because non-relational databases which would then add complexities as well. And I think to go there, you need to first understand relational databases, which are quite simpler to understand and easier to follow through. And therefore, the modules are arranged in a logical order. But when you're delivering a particular lesson or you are covering slides, you can of course order the slides in whichever way that you want, right? And then the time that you're spending on every module, but let's get down to the lessons in every module. But then you might want to get down to every slide that you have in every lesson. Please spend the time which is proportionate to the relative weight of that topic that you're talking about. So we have some idea as to what is the weightage of every module, right? And that would actually drive you to see overall how much time you're spending on one particular module. And and at the end of each module, because there are 4 modules, right, it is advisable that you do Q&A. Now the Q&A, in order to do it in a more engaging way, you saw me using Menti. You can also use one of these technologies. So to keep your learners engaged, at the end of the module, there would be questions that you can just ask them, right? And then have them respond to that. Because you can also use that opportunity to get a sense as to how many people are getting it right. And if they don't, you can of course spend some more time in explaining the concepts that you are covering in that Q&A. The other important thing is give frequent breaks. I mean, nobody actually likes to sit in longer and longer sessions without any break. So break is good. It is refreshing, and it actually lets learner grasp more, of course, rather than not having break for the whole day. So give the frequent breaks. But then the thing is, when do you give the break? As I said, the course covers the demos as well, and as well as the hands-on labs. And depending on the services that you're provisioning in Azure portal, you might see that provisioning one service takes a little longer than the other. Now, if you're provisioning, for example, a Cosmos DB database, now provisioning that might actually take 7 to 10 minutes. Now, while that provisioning is being done, you can actually take a quick break in between. So you can actually use that time to take the breaks and develop slide deck notes. What are the key things that you want to communicate, you want to share with the learners? If you have the notes ready, you are actually well prepared to cover that content. And at the same time, in case there is a question or in case there is a clarification that you need to provide, you can better answer that, because we tend to forget things, right? It is impossible to remember everything. But if you have the notes ready, you can take a note of important concepts that you're talking about. And in case there is a question around and you have forgotten that, you can actually still reference back to the notes that you have. Going through just the slides becomes a little boring, and therefore whiteboarding in the training becomes very, very essential. So we would encourage you to do the whiteboarding as well, wherever you find appropriate, of course, because we tend to remember more when we see something being drawn, right, rather than just reading. So for the whiteboard, you can use different technologies available. We have one for Microsoft, that is Microsoft Whiteboard, right? And that actually works just fine. And because we are in this pandemic time where not all the students might be sitting physically in front of you, so the physical blackboard might not work, right? And therefore, in that setup, you can use a technology such as Microsoft Whiteboard. And this is, one such technology that I would very quickly like to show you. So you can create a whiteboard, and then of course, if you have a pen, you can write here in different colors, and that would stick better with the learners. And what you could get to is something like this, where as you are delivering, as you are teaching, you are drawing, and you are covering the concepts in this manner, and therefore it would retain for a longer time for your learners. So you can do that. But remember one thing, in order to do that, you need to have a device on which you can use a pen. Your screen has to be ready for that, right? Just keep that in mind. Now, module best practices. Let's go through every module one by one, and we take a look at what are the essential things, what are the objectives of every module that you need to meet. Module number 1, which is explore core data concepts. This module, as I mentioned earlier, it has a lots of definitions. The definitions around what is a relational database, what is a non-relational database, what does OLTP stands for, what does OLAP stands for, what is analytics workload, what is data warehousing workload, right? So there are a lot of definitions, but they would be very important for your learners from the certification perspective, right? And then some of these definitions or abbreviations will then get used in the subsequent modules. So it is essential that they understand it, right? So take your time to get them comfortable with these various definitions that come along. And in the training, use storytelling and examples, because you do it this way, it actually sticks for a longer time, right? Now, if you are covering the concepts around relational databases, right, you can give an example of, let's say, somebody visiting a supermarket and making a transaction over there. Now, every time when you swipe your card, there is a transaction or there is a record that gets created. And that record is of fixed structure, and therefore you can store it in a relational database in a table, right? So these kind of examples, as you offer time to time, it would actually make more sense, and it would also add to the clarity that they get around a particular service or the concept that you are talking about. The next thing is, remember, this is a fundamental course. So you are not required to go too deeper into the services. How are the services working internally? And also probably not look at every option that you can configure in Azure portal when you're doing the demo. At the end of the day, it is a fundamental course, and we just need to offer the sufficient enough detail, right? Or I would say, in a broader way, we have to cover many topics, right? But we do not necessarily have to go deeper, right? So mile wide and inch deep is basically what we usually say here. And that is what this course is basically designed for. Now, when you're covering module number 1, we are just talking about different types of services at a very high level. So you don't really have to go down deeper, because we are covering each one of these service in quite a lot of details in the subsequent modules, right? Otherwise, there would be redundancy. Just keep that in mind. And this is also the longest module in the course. So you just need to be careful that you do not overspend time here, right? So that is another important aspect. Then comes module number 2, explore relational data in Azure. Now, relational databases can be deployed in many different ways. So it is important that you convey to the learners what are the different approaches in which relational databases can be deployed in Azure. And that's where the first point comes into the picture. Explain the difference between IaaS, that stands for Infrastructure as a Service, and PaaS, Platform as a Service. There are advantages of using PaaS over IaaS. So it is important that your learners understand that. And they can very clearly differentiate when they pick a service in Azure. They can very quickly very clearly differentiate whether it is a PaaS service or an IaaS service. So that is very important, because any service that you pick up, it would be either covered as a PaaS or an IaaS. Azure has a lot of PaaS services, by the way. And then a difference between SQL services. See, because there are services which are offered in different flavors. So if I were to give you an example, if you're deploying a SQL Server database, SQL Server database can be deployed in a virtual machine in an IaaS setup. where you maintain the virtual machine, of course. You can also deploy that as a PaaS service, that is Azure SQL. But Azure SQL simply offers you the capability to deploy only one database. But you might have SQL Server databases running in a virtual machine, which are still running several databases in one instance of SQL. And that's where the third service comes into the picture, which is called Azure SQL Server Managed Instance, which is a new service comparatively. But it is created for the cases where if one instance of SQL Server was deploying multiple databases, and Azure SQL service cannot cope up with that because it has a limitation of just one database, you can choose SQL Server managed instances because that would allow you to run many different databases in a single instance. Hey, but SQL Server in a VM is IaaS. Azure SQL is a PaaS, and SQL Server managed instance is a PaaS as well. And if that is the case, then what is the difference between running SQL Server in a virtual machine and running SQL Server in a SQL Server managed instance? Right? So you would be able to clearly throw this clarity that one is IaaS and the other one is PaaS. So of course you have different flavors of services. So just spend a little time to clarify what are the differences between these services which sound similar, so that they are clear on which service can be used where. SQL Server, of course, happens to be one of the relational database that Microsoft has been offering for a very long time. But when it comes to Azure, the times have changed. Microsoft has become very open, and therefore there are many other relational databases which can be deployed in Azure. You can deploy still Oracle-like services in a virtual machine setup, right? So just share that. But in addition to that, because a lot of new deployments, they involve PaaS services. Therefore, you can share other relational databases services such as MySQL, PostgreSQL, and MariaDB. So these are other services, or I wouldn't say MariaDB, but definitely MySQL and PostgreSQL. So these are the other relational database services that are covered or that are available in Azure, right? So just to let learners know that it is not just about one product and one technology. And this module also covers what is referred to as role-based access control, right? Which is this point. Because there needs to be proper permissions which needs to set up so that you can control access, who can access your data and who cannot. But before you cover that, keep in mind that you cover Azure Active Directory first, right? The AD basic concept. So cover the AD basic concept and then follow through to RBAC, because once you have covered that, they would actually appreciate how is RBAC actually working behind the scene, because at the core of it, you have Active Directory making that magic possible. And then use examples of relational databases. As I gave one, you could be using your own examples as well. I'll pause again to see if there are any other questions that you have so far.
There's a question in the chat asking you to talk about the hardware requirements and RAM requirements for operating the class.
Yeah, okay. So you do not, I mean, any basic laptop that you have been using would be sufficient for this, because I think even if you go for the lowest configuration possible today, you would still be looking for, I would say, at the least 2 gigabytes of RAM, right? Or at least 2 processors, right? So even that much would be sufficient for this, because all the magic is happening in Azure portal. So you just need the processing power, which is good enough to run a browser, a web browser, so that in the browser you are able to launch Azure portal and you are able to provision the services. That is the only requirement. Other than that, there is no specific hardware related requirement for the machine that you are using. But it just need to have a modern operating system and a modern browser, as I said. Okay. So if anybody else has any other question, please feel free to type it in the chat window and we'll take that up. Now, module number 3, which is explore non-relational data in Azure. It is very important for you to explain what are the different types of storages that you have in Azure. I mean, of course, we are talking about non-relational database here, and there could be a number of services that you can talk about. We can talk about Cosmos DB. We can talk about storage account. And in the storage account, we have different types of storage. We have table storage. We have file storage, right? We have queue storage. So explain the difference between the different types of storages that you have when you talk about storage accounts. So they need to be, your learners need to be clear about that. And because there are different types of storages available, it is advisable that you show demo, a very quick demo of every type of storage that is available. So when it comes to storage account, there are 4 different types of storages available, and it is not difficult to show a very quick demo of that. So you should actually cover that so that they understand that storage account is one service, but it offers 4 different types of data which can be stored in there. But other than Azure storage, we also have Cosmos DB. Now, Cosmos DB happens to be a very different type of service than your typical database offerings that you have. Because firstly, it is a non-relational database. Secondly, it is a multi-master database. Because often if you are running workload and people from 2 regions are accessing that, and you want people from both of the regions to be reading as well as writing the data, that's where the Cosmos DB comes in, because it offers that capability. You wouldn't have any other relational database or any other non-relational service offering such a capability. And that actually differentiates the service from any other database services that we have in Azure. And it is also a multi-model database. So you can deploy a MongoDB application on this. You can deploy a Gremlin or a graph database on this. You can also deploy a columnar database like Cassandra. So one answer to many different types of problems is what Cosmos DB offers. So just convey that clarity when it comes to Cosmos DB. And then we often talk about consistency in relational databases because that becomes a very important topic. But when it comes to non-relational database such as Cosmos DB, the service offers many different flavors of consistencies that you can set up or configure. So we have strong, right? We have session, we have, we have eventual. So it is important that you focus on different consistency levels and you throw clarity on that. Now, when I deliver courses, because I actually deliver advanced role-based courses as well, which are around data. So we go much deeper into Cosmos DB, which is not required here. But to best explain the consistencies in Cosmos DB, I would suggest that you make use of Microsoft Azure documentation pages where they talk about consistency because they explain this with the help of an animation. And that would actually do a better job than just talking about it. So please look for Cosmos DB consistencies, and you will find that where the animation is used to explain consistency, and that would help you a great deal. Next, explore modern data warehouse. Now, when you cover this module, because you need to get to a very important differentiation, which is a data warehouse versus Azure Synapse. One happens to be a core data warehouse. The other happens to be much more than that, much more powerful than that. But before they can appreciate the difference between the two, you need to make clear to them what a data warehouse is. What does it take to create a data warehouse? Because you might be getting data from somewhere and you could have a number of services which pull the data and then you store it in the data warehouse. And then later on, you could be cleaning or aggregating the data because it goes to the end user. And that is what explains the different components of implementing a data warehouse. But then moving on to the second point, you need to be conveying the difference between a data warehouse and Azure Synapse service, Synapse Analytics service. Now, they are different because data warehouse is just the data warehouse which comprises of several components. The more capacity that you allocate, the more powerful it becomes. But then often you would have restrictions when you don't do it on cloud. And that's where Azure Synapse comes into the picture. It is a cloud native service. It is an Azure native service. You can actually provision any amount of compute to this. So your learners need to know that. And then they will appreciate how Synapse Analytics is a better service than data warehouse. There are no restrictions in terms of course, how much data can you store on Synapse, but at the same time, it would allow you to query data in no time, irrespective of amount of data that you're dealing with. So it's like a data warehouse on steroid, right? And data warehouses are created so that data can be served to the people. And that's where we talk about technologies such as Power BI, which are part of this course or which are part of this module. But there are many other reporting technologies as well. Many learners would be using many different reporting technologies. Now, it doesn't matter which data warehouse technology that you use, but they might still want to choose their own. And therefore, you can focus on Power BI, but mention other reporting solutions as well. They could be Microsoft, they could be non-Microsoft solutions, I would say. Now, demos and labs. Let's talk about that. Before any demo can be done, I think the first thing that you should be doing is to get people familiar as to how does Azure portal look like and how do you navigate along Azure portal. I think that is the most important thing. So that should be the first demo that you need to show when you deliver this course. And it is advisable that when you are doing the demo, you actually wait for your learners to walk through with you. So make sure that they are following through. And as you proceed with one step after the other step, they can actually catch up because it will give them that confidence that yes, they are able to do it and they are not leaving it for another day. In between, they forget something and the objective is not met, right? There are many demos available. You need to choose which one do you want to show. But when you're choosing them, don't choose too many similar kind of demos, right? Like how to provision Azure SQL and how to provision Azure SQL managed instance. So those would be considered similar demos. Maybe cover one where you show how to provision SQL and the other demo, how to provision Cosmos DB. That would be great, right? And sometimes when you're delivering trainings, there could be many factors which can go wrong. Let's say your network is interrupted. Let's say there's something wrong with the Azure portal at one particular point in time, and you can't actually proceed with the demo. So I think it would be advisable that you record the demos because many a times it happens in my class that if I don't have a demo recorded, something goes wrong, and then there is no other choice but for the students to wait. So to avoid that scenario, if you have the demos recorded, of course it takes a little while to do that, but I think that would help you a great deal in case you end up in any kind of issues. Then there are hands-on labs, of course, which your learners would be doing. Advise them to use a region which is closest to their location, right? Or to your location. Because when you do that, the latency or the performance or the response that you would be having would be much better. And everything would work very, very quickly. So that would be the best possible experience that you would get. And then do a few demo labs first. And you can also decide which labs to do, of course, right? Because what happens is in module number 4, there is a lab that asks you to provision many different data related services. And then you integrate all of it together, right? So that would be one of the interesting lab to show to the students, because they actually get a sense of how end to end services are integrated and how does the data flow from one service to the other. So that would be a good one to talk about. But since your learners are doing the hands-on labs themselves, I think before you go to the training, you also need to be familiar with that, because if you're not familiar and a question gets asked, you need to first find out yourself what's going on. So I think once you have gone through the demos or through the hands-on, you are familiar with that and you can actually help them in a timely manner. All right. Any questions at this moment before I move to supplemental material? I see nothing in the chat window so far, so I'm hoping that there's none.
I also see nothing in the Q&A panel, so I assume there are none at the moment.
Okay, sure. So in that case, let's move on. Now there's some supplemental material that we want to leave you with. And those are, there are online documentation available. Every service that we cover in Azure, I mean, in this particular course, I would say, which is Azure Fundamental, Data Fundamental, I'm sorry. Every such service has its thorough documentation, which is maintained on Microsoft documentations. In case, I mean, of course, we are covering this course, right? And there could be some learners who are interested to go deeper into the technology. If you just share with them that, hey, here is the online documentation link where everything is available about this service, so feel free to explore, feel free to read more, that actually helps. In addition to that, there is MS Learn, and MS Learn is a good spot which gives you just nice amount of information to learn a service, because you might find sometimes that online documentation a little overwhelming because it goes into so much of detail and everything is covered there. But if you go to MS Learn, it actually just gives you the right amount of knowledge about the topic that you're covering. And that actually proves to be much more effective for some learners. So just keep that in mind. Azure Blob, a lot of people are writing about Azure services as they use, as they learn. So Azure Blob is another thing where you could find answers to the questions. So just let this know to your learners that if you're wondering about how does a particular service work, look for Azure blogs as well. Then there are Azure forums. There are groups where there are multiple people contributing to, to how Azure services can be improved, and there are best practices and recommendations that come out of those forums, right? So visit those forums to get details is what you can always convey to your learners. There are free Microsoft hands-on labs available, of course, which are part of the course. But if you talk about MS Learn also gives you kind of a sandbox environment in which you can do the labs without having to have an additional Azure subscription. Many of your learners would like to, step up or take a next step in order to understand the technologies and to know how do they work, how are they integrated together to create a reference architecture, right? Or to create an architecture. We have a repository of various reference architectures in Azure that actually helps you to take a look at how would a typical reference architecture looks like if you're implementing a data warehouse. Share these details with your learners, because somebody could have a very deep interest in data warehouse, right? They can look for those reference architecture to understand how are the solutions designed using such a service. There are articles which Microsoft Geeks or Geeks keeps posting about the services. They are the good reference as well. And then also we have a lot of videos available on Channel 9, right? We have Azure Friday videos available, and we tend to cover one of the technology. We tend to pick up a technology and the new features that are coming up and added to that. So that is another source of information that you can share with your learners. So there is a lot of supplementary material available for you. And then the next thing is exam preparation here. There are practice tests available, and I would very quickly show you something here. Because if you remember just now, we were talking about MS Learn, right? And you can actually very quickly find out Microsoft Learn if you type it in your browser. And you go to learn.microsoft.com. And to better prepare for an exam, the best advice that I give to my students and my other advanced role-based courses as well is to visit Microsoft Learn, because this has come along to be a portal which has all the details that you would need to have in order to pass an exam, in order to learn a technology. And it's all about Azure services, right? There are all the services covered. The good thing is if you know the certification, which is DP900 in our case, and you can just browse for that certification here, and you can type in DP900 and search for that. It'll show you that. And when you go to basically this exam page and you scroll down a little bit, you would see online free learning material. So in addition to that, whatever you are covering, if the people or if the learners are interested in a lot more, in knowing a lot more, you can actually always refer to them here. And the other thing that you would notice here is skill measured. It shows you what you're measured on. And you can also ask them to download the exam skills online, which in a way gives you the detailed topics which the exam would be focusing on or the exam would be testing you upon, right? So this is the best source which you can use in order to prepare for the exam, I would say, and it is all free of cost and is available to everybody, right? Now, I see that there is a question at this moment, and Colin Adrian is asking if I am teacher and I'll have 200 USD per year. My students 100 USD per year, and on a Linux machine, I put MySQL Server. All right. On a MySQL Server, what is the best solution? Okay, so when you deploy MySQL, there are various ways in which you can deploy that, right? So I am going to very quickly launch Azure portal here. See, MySQL can be deployed in two ways, but the most preferred is that you deploy that as a PaaS service, right? So you deploy that as a PaaS service. There are different options which you could choose. I would very quickly show you. So if I type in MySQL and I choose Azure Database for MySQL Server, you would see that you would see that I can just start creating an Azure SQL database. And what are the options that I have available now here? Let me zoom in. You have an option to provision a single server and you have an option to have a flexible server. Now, what to cover in your class? I think the best would be to use a single server because you do not want all the credit to be utilized so fast. Therefore, start small, which is good enough and gives you sufficient platform to demo. So I think this would be the option that you should be choosing in this case, right? So this is a PaaS service. It can all do, you can do all this in Azure portal. You do not need to have a virtual machine, right? Or a Linux virtual machine for that. But in case you need to have something like that, just make sure that you have a Linux machine which is installed with MySQL, but then only run the virtual machine for as long as you need it. Okay, so keep that in mind so that you minimize the consumption. I hope I've answered that question there. So the students would be creating an instance of Azure database for MySQL, not on a Linux machine, actually. So they would be creating a PaaS service. You should ask them to provision a PaaS service instance of MySQL in this case, so that they don't have to worry about any VM. I hope that answers the question. But with that, I'm going to go back to where we were. So make use of those materials that you saw, right? And of course, on Microsoft Learn, you also have learning path, which actually gives you step by step what is to be covered and what is the content that you need to focus on. And it comes with hands-on labs, and it also comes with its own sandbox environment wherein you can go and do the labs. Okay, so now at the end, the wrap up. just summarize the learning, because at the end of the session, as you have covered 4 modules, right? Just summarize what have you covered in every module and kind of a wrap up so that they can memorize it all. There is a flow that you have served to them and they would better appreciate that. There are learning resources available that we have shared, of course, and feel free to share with them. Have the exam discussion because many students would be looking to get certified as well. So have that exam discussion, give them the details about things like Microsoft Learn, etc., so that they can use it at their own pace and prepare for the exams. And then, at the end, there would be learning experience survey as well. I mean, you could actually have it for yourself, but in this case, in our case, as we are on this training, there is a survey and we would ask you to share your feedback about how did you find this particular session, which is train the trainer session. So we would encourage you to go to this link and submit your survey over there. And while other people do that, I can actually take maybe another question. Okay. So the Kellen said that the question was answered. So there are no further questions at this moment. So if you have any questions at this moment, we are inching towards the end of the session. If you have any further questions, please type in. Feel free to ask. In the meantime, you can go to this link and take the survey.
And I've also put the link in the chat, in the Q&A.
Okay, thank you for that, Marisa. Okay, any last question that anyone of you might want to ask?
I don't see anything. It's provided a lot of great details. Thank you so much. So I
think with that, I would just end it here, and I appreciate you taking time. And we are hoping that you would be taking some of this information back to the learners so that they learn the new sphere of technology that is towards cloud computing. Thanks a lot for your patience and enjoy the rest of the day or catch a better sleep if it is night there. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepanshu, and thank you all for being here. We will keep the chat open for a few minutes just in case anything trickles in, and otherwise, we'll see you in the next training.